Good morning, and welcome to another week of Journey with Christ. I'm your host, Mark Mitchell, a preaching minister here at the Park Avenue Church of Christ in Charleston, West Virginia. And I'm joined as always by Steve Fox, our, as I stated last week, resident expert, and he's going to put that on a business card soon.
Oh, I already did.
For
50 years. Got 500 of them. As soon as I pass them out, I'm going to retire again. Susie says I can't retire again because that means I'd be in the house all the time.
Oh.
Yes, in your terms, I'm a resident scholar.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to just leave it at that.
We're not going to take a vote.
Yeah. We're not going to say what in,
you
but
can call in. What's the number they can call in?
Call in 1-800. We don't know.
We don't know. I'm doing okay. I feel okay. You always ask me how I am, and I sometimes ask you how you are, even though we've seen each other the day before.
Yep.
My grandpa Henry had a saying. I heard him say this lots of times. People would say, "Well, how are you?" And he'd say, "If I was any better, I'd have to be twins." So yeah. I stole that and used it a few times.
Yeah.
But yeah. That's a good way to approach it.
Absolutely. For our audience and for those that's been watching, we want to remind you where we are and what we've been studying. Steve has proposed a question for us. What was the reaction to what Jesus taught and said and did? And we're continuing that today. I think we're going to kind of like come to a conclusion today, but next week we go down a different point of that understanding. And if you'd like to turn your Bibles to Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse 14, Steve's going to read that, and then we're going to go with a continuation of what is the individual's response toward what Jesus has to say.
I think this is a very legitimate question. How did these people in the first century respond to who Jesus was and what he was teaching, his doctrine, his policies? You know, you hear in the world today, you hear that word policy thrown around a lot. Okay, that's the Democratic policy or the Republican policy, or that's what we're going to, or the presidential. And in Mark always makes it a point to say, look what Jesus taught and look what he did.
And look what happened.
And then look what happened after that, and see how people responded to what he did. It's eye-opening. I mean, and Mark wants us to know that this man is a servant, and as he goes through his ministry doing things, not everybody's going to bow down and worship him. Not everybody's going to say, you know, any of us who have preached a sermon have had people go out and say, "Good sermon."
Then you ask, what
did you like about it? How do you respond to a good sermon? Most sermons we hear, you go out and it doesn't mean a thing. It doesn't affect you at all. And you and I've talked about, in your case, your true conversion. Somebody preached a sermon and really the scripture got to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What was said?
You responded in a certain way.
When the words came across, it resonated in my heart and created a reaction, not only in my mind, but in my emotional state. Both were affected.
Yeah.
That's when you know, to me, that's when you know it's real. Sometimes people can say something and think, "Oh, that's a good thought," and it just clicks up here, you know. But what John is illustrating to us in these things we're reading, we're getting more than an intellectual thought process going on. We got an emotional response that he's describing that they're giving, whether it be they're puzzled, or I'm not for that, or wow, you know, there's always something that goes with it. And in our understanding and studying, we should walk away from, when we're in these something, even if it's just very little, like, yeah, I needed that.
1968, I laid on the couch in our apartment with Susie asleep in the other room. And I laid on that. I can tell you what I had on because I just got back from running. And I laid on that couch and cried like I was 5 years old. Because I kept telling God, I don't want to be a speech major. I know people have talked me into this to say, well, if you're not going to preach, you got something back to fall back on. You can teach, you can teach speech.
And it worked so well.
Yeah, you just heard it before.
Yeah,
But I laid on that couch saying, I don't want to be a speech major. I want to be a minister. And for me to do that, I'm going to have certain classes to get a degree in that. And I might have to take some extra hours, but I don't want to get to the end of my college career and say, then give me a diploma. It's got a speech major.
I can get up in front of anybody and talk. Well,
So that was all of us. I think I love to hear people talk about the time when they decided what they were going to do with their faith.
Mm-hmm.
This is not mom and dad's faith anymore. This is my faith.
Mm-hmm.
This is not grandma and grandpa's. This is not the preacher's.
It's not something I grew up with and kind of think, hey, I tried it on. It worked. It looked like it might work.
When I hear people, ministers on the radio say, you have to accept him as your personal savior, and then we all go crazy because that's not a biblical phrase. That's what we're doing. We're actually accepting Jesus as something personal, not the room, not the college, not the state. We're not following any of that. It
has to begin
there. We
there.
follow Jesus, but we don't follow his followers.
No, and it has to begin with a personal, like a husband and wife standing in front of a minister. Now they might do it in front of everybody, but the only two people up there that's it's relevant to everything he's saying is the groom and the bride.
I'm always impressed when I ask people who I'm going to marry, do you want to write your own vows? The woman, the bride, usually says, yes, I'd like to do that. The guy says, I want to be as far away from that place as I can possibly be. I got two answers for you, no, and well,
Yeah.
Most guys don't want to do that, but the women want to do it. And you're right, they're saying that to each other. They're not saying that to anybody in the audience. They're not even saying that to the minister or the best man or the maid of honor. That's the most personal thing you can have between two people.
Absolutely. And what you've brought up here this morning is what Mark is illustrating to us, and I can't wait to read our next one today.
Well, let's read it. If you're reading along, Mark 8, verse 14. Now they had forgotten to bring bread. I love the way that starts. We were going on this trip, but we didn't bring any
bread.
food. We didn't bring any bread at all. What are we going to do now? I hope some other people brought some extra.
Yeah.
Now they'd forgotten to bring bread, and they had only a loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, take heed, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they discussed it with one another, saying, we have no bread. They will from, hey, here's these guys, you better watch out and you better take care of your own life and be careful for these other idiots who are trying to kill you. And they said again, well, we don't have any food.
I honestly
their priority.
I'm kind of reminded of possibly Abbott and Costello or Laurel and Hardy. They're having a conversation, and one person's talking about one thing, and the other guy's talking about something else, and they actually think they're talking to one another.
And they became millionaires doing that.
I know. And Jesus right here is talking about one thing, and they're still hung up on bread.
Well, Susie and I watched a part of a documentary about Groucho Marx last week.
Mm-hmm.
He was on the Dick Cavett show. I was going to say before he died. It was obviously before he died.
Yeah.
And he went through all these little one-liners that he just came up with in the middle of the script. Nobody wrote it. And I was laughing. I couldn't get my breath.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, And it was one of those things. He's one of those comics that when you first hear him say something, there may just be darkness in there, and all of a sudden the light goes on. Oh, I see what he meant.
Yeah, that's funny.
Like he said, like King David II said to his second wife, I won't keep you very long. Just little stuff like that.
Yeah.
And here, when they discussed this among themselves, they went back to the one thing that they were all worried about. We don't have anything to eat. And beware of it. Jesus said to them, why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? And here's where the response starts. Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did they take up? And they said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to them, 7. And he said to them, do you not yet understand? I don't cook a lot, so I don't use yeast or anything that affects the food that I'm not cooking. Jesus says, basically what he's saying is, you have to understand there are certain principles about what we eat and how we do it, and there are also certain principles about how things influence you. And you haven't figured that out yet. You haven't figured out that the Pharisees and the Sadducees and other great leaders of their time were trying to get these people so mixed up they wanted to take their attention off the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
So here's another one of those passages where he says, don't you understand?
Well, I think the question poses a couple thoughts to first of all to have. And I've been wondering about this for a long time. Have you ever driven someplace and then when you get there you think to yourself, how did I get here? Or have you ever just done something and you're just kind of like doing it without even thinking? You're just kind of like someplace else and doing it.
When we go to Nashville, where our oldest son lives, and I've told you this, we've made so many trips down there, we just put our car on cruise control and go back and fall asleep because we're going to Nashville.
Sometimes in life, we get this mindset. I know what's going to happen here. I understand. And we relax and do not comprehend everything that's going on. I mean, I've seen movie clips where they've done this to people, where they've stuck something over in a corner like a pink elephant or something of that nature, and just be having a conversation with them, and they don't even recognize it. It doesn't even dawn on them till they point to it, and when they point it, I didn't see that there. Mm-hmm. How come? When it comes to your life and the way we live in Jesus, we can't just get lost in the mundane and think, oh, I know what's going to happen here. I understand everything. I've got it all worked out, It's like sometimes when I watch a movie, I already know who did it. I don't need to watch into this.
I had a professor at Harding who said, a Bible professor, who said, do not ever read familiar passages and say, oh, I know what happens here.
Yeah.
You read it like
it's the first time.
First time you ever saw that. First time you ever picked up a Bible and read that paragraph or read that book. Don't skip over it and say, I know what Acts 2 says. I know what Isaiah 2 says. I don't have to read that. I know what Joel 2 says.
Well, I'll even go one further. I remember when I because I'd heard that thought process, so I went and took the story of the Prodigal Son, which all of us have heard so many times in our lives, started reading it every day for 30 days. By the time I got done reading it after 30 days, I had in my arsenal, I had 5, 6, maybe 10 additional sermons that from that passage that I'd never seen before. So when Jesus tells him, I mean, they're talking about bread. And of course, he just uses the little instance to say, well, make sure you don't have the yeast of the Pharisees. And
don't let other people influence you like that.
Yeah. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees, yeah.
You know, you and I both were chasing rabbits down the hole here in a little while ago. I want to put another road out there for us to follow for a little bit. I went to a church at Northgate in Atlanta, Georgia, with two of my best friends, and we went to church. I think it's called Northgate, maybe, and Andy Stanley preaches there.
Mm-hmm.
We went in and sat down with about 2,000 other people.
Yep.
And when he got up there, he said he's going to finish the series today on the Ten Commandments. I go, oh man, Ten Commandments. He made me see something that, I know a little bit about the Bible. I'm not sure ever. I'm not. So.
Yeah.
He said every one of these Ten Commandments came from the Egyptians' relationship with what they did to the Hebrews.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of them are based on, don't you be like that. Honor your father and mother. Don't be like that. Don't bear false witness. That's what the Egyptians did, don't they? I never saw that before. And now every time I read the Ten Commandments, I think I'm going to learn the Ten Commandments one of these days.
Well, like, as you said, I think, we get familiar and quit looking and quit having our eyes open. We lose the awe in the relationship that we have with Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And you can't ever lose that. The minute you think you've got it figured out and you're just going to miss a bunch of stuff. And I don't know if that's what's going on here with the apostles, but they're missing it, because Jesus quickly points them out to them. Don't you remember what I did with the 5,000, the 4,000? I mean, how many? Do you?
I can do that again. I can stand right here.
I can take that one loaf you got right there and just. You want to multiply it now? We could be. This boat could go down because we have so much bread in it. Do you? He doesn't say that. But.
Do you want fries with that? Oh no, that's something different. So he says, he's not asking him a math question. He's saying, don't you remember how I multiplied the loaves and you had plenty to eat and had stuff left over? Don't you remember that? Do you not understand what I'm trying to teach you?
He asks him even the question, do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear?
Mm-hmm.
And don't you...
And they said to him, he said to them, do you not yet understand? All of us have had teachers who put something out there, but they didn't give all of it to us, and they wanted us to work on it by ourselves, come to different conclusions based on what we know and what we have learned. That's how he ends this conversation here. Do you not yet understand? There's a lot of times in the Gospels, and one of my favorite parts of the Gospels is when something happens after Jesus' resurrection, and the Gospel writer will write, they understood this after the resurrection, or after he said something.
Yeah. Well, how many times, Steve, have you, as you and I both have lived our lives, we'd read something in the text and it didn't really hit us, but then we had an experience in life where that verse now came to life.
Mm-hmm.
That it just all of a sudden changed everything for us. We had eyes to see and ears to hear, and we could understand what we couldn't understand. I had a friend of mine who's a minister from Texas. He said to me one time, he said, there are going to be times that God's going to give you something and you think you understand it, and you go to try to explain it to somebody, and you just fumble all over yourself. He said, and then there's going to be times that you get even a deeper degree, and you understand it, and you actually can explain it. He said, but then there's going to come a moment when it's yours, when it's you've gone from you not only went in and went to the tailor, and the tailor took your measurements, you picked out the cloth, he made the coat for you, and you put it on, and it fit perfectly. Altered, everything was perfect. Sometimes in life, things that you begin to understand will become tailor-fitted for you, and you can tell anybody. You don't even need to get the scripture out. You can just share it.
If you have any book that Fred Craddock wrote about preaching, just read through it. Because one of the things he says early in the book is, excuse me, he carried 3x5 index cards in his pocket. And he said, I've done that for 50 years. Well, I've been doing that too. I didn't know him, and his sermon's probably a little bit better than mine. But he said, I keep a 3x5 index card in my pocket. When I hear something that jars my memory or jars my mind, I write that down on the card, put it back in my pocket. He said, now, if you preachers start doing that, you will find that, oh yeah, this fits here. I remember when that happened. Oh, I remember when I read this. And he said, now, don't drag it into the sermon, kicking and screaming. Don't just say, well, this is a good point, so I'm going to throw this in the sermon.
Yeah, I like this.
It has absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the sermon, but I've got to tell that story.
Yeah, don't tailor your sermon to the story.
Other way around.
Yeah.
And I loved it when he said, don't pull that card kicking and screaming into your next sermon. He said, you just file that away.
You've got it.
And 7 weeks down the road, 12 weeks down the road, next year, that'll fit perfectly into what you want to say. And that goes back to the providence of God plus our free will to decide how we're going to make that sermon or class or life or however we want to do it.
Well, it helps with us as we go along, our topic has been, what is your response to what Jesus is doing? Because the one thing that we need to keep in mind as we're doing this, we're not just critiquing the apostles or disciples. We're trying to draw parallels. Okay, am I doing some of that in my life? Am I ignoring or not paying attention?
Here's where we get in trouble, Mark. Most people read the Bible and they say, okay, let's take a parable, for example. This parable, that's what that means to me. And there's this, and that represents that, and this is at the end of the parable, and this is at the beginning of the parable. And we look and see what that parable means to us, and then if we have time, we go back and see what the parable said to the original hearers.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly the opposite of what we ought to do with the Bible. You don't do it that way. You don't say, well, that's what it means to me, and if we got time, we'll talk about it over here. Jesus wanted those people to know those were the first hearers of that, and his words were eternal.
Mm-hmm.
We're sitting here reading Jesus' words from the four Gospels, and 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now, they'll still be reading that because those words are eternal.
Mm-hmm.
But it's easy for us to say, well, I'm not sure what this means to me, so I'm going to go over here and look at it. We got to do it. What does this parable mean to the original hearers? And then ask the question, what does it mean to me?
Yeah.
And by the way, if I had to pay for everything I stole from Fred Craddock, I'd be a poor man. Every book he was a professor at Emory in Atlanta, and everything he wrote was just gold, especially to a preacher.
Yeah. Well, so
people talk about me like that most of the time. They say, hey, here's 10 sermons that Stephen gave me that I will never even think about preaching.
You were telling a joke, right? You weren't serious?
Yeah.
Because I did laugh. I wanted to make sure.
Well, I hadn't got to the punchline yet, but that's what they said about Jim Jones.
Yeah.
He couldn't tell a joke, but he had a great punchline.
Yeah.
Don't write that in there.
Yeah. I'll edit that out, folks. Thank you. Our next passage that Steve has picked out for us is in Mark chapter 9, verses 30 through 32, and I'm going to turn there and read that, and Steve is going to take off with it this time. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were, because he was teaching his disciples, and he said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." But they did not understand what he meant, and were afraid to ask him about it.
Boy, does that fit that category we've already been discussing, or what?
I don't know.
Why is it that he was trying to hide? Now, again, let me remind you of what we're trying to do here. Jesus did certain things or taught certain things, and then people responded, reacted to those things that they saw Jesus do. So, when you read that, the first thing that hits us is they passed through Galilee, and he didn't want anybody to know it. You know, usually it's a lot of people surrounding him, a lot of people wanting a miracle done, a lot of people wanted to ask about maybe some further instruction about a teaching that he taught. And here, it says he didn't want anybody to know it because he was having a little conference with the disciples. They went to a seminar for a while. They went to a place where the questions were being asked and the questions were being answered.
All right.
It strikes us a little bit unusual when it says in verse 30, he didn't want anybody to know where he was. There were some times when he just needed by himself, or there were times when he needed with that small group of people that he had taught for 3 years.
Well, you would have to. I don't think our audience here would also disagree with about what I'm about to say. If they had a hard time understanding yeast and bread, him dying and being raised, that's just like going from basic arithmetic to calculus and think, okay, you got this? You know, because in chapter 8 we just read about the bread, and in chapter 9 he's actually taking them someplace so that he can really get them hopefully to begin to understand.
And he's not using figures of speech. He's not using similes or other figures of speech.
Or parables.
Where it's kind of fuzzy and then the parable gets clear.
He said flat out here.
Look how much different it is from all the other. I understand this isn't a parable, but he's shooting straight here and telling them what's going to happen.
I'm going to die.
And most of them are saying, no, you're not. I'll never allow you to die.
Yeah.
We'll get together and take care of you. We'll protect you.
Yeah.
He was teaching his disciples. Teaching and preaching comes up in the 4 Gospels all the time. Now, there are some exceptions to this, but most of the time, 90% of the time when you see the word teaching, you're talking about the gospel. I'm sorry. When you see the term preaching, it's discussing the
good news.
The good news. When you see the word teaching, it's what Jesus taught or what the apostles taught afterwards, what men who wrote the New Testament.
What I preached about now, I'm going to explain it to you.
Exactly. He was teaching his disciples, saying to them, okay, what did he teach them? The Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of men. Son of Man. That's him.
Mm-hmm.
He refers to himself as the Son of Man several times in the Gospels. And they will kill him. Well, that hits you right between the eyes. Here we thought he was the one. We thought he was the one who was going to come in and take care of the Romans, and we were going to be the greatest kingdom in the history of the world. And he says, they will kill him. You don't kill heroes. You don't kill sons of man. You don't kill the Son of God in any way.
Shouldn't be able to, anyway.
Son of Man will be delivered into the hands of men. In this case, the Gentiles and the Romans. Excuse me. And they will kill him. He repeats it. And when he is killed, after 3 days, he will rise. Now, resurrection is not something in the Old Testament that you just stumble over every 2
No,
or 3 pages.
there's a few elements, but
it's very rare.
Very rare.
So he's saying, I'm going to be resurrected. God's going to raise me from the dead. He will rise. And when he says that after 3 days he will rise, they go back to what their usual statement is in the Gospels. But they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to ask him.
Yeah.
What is he talking about? They're going to kill him? That's me. They're going to kill me. They're going to bury me. I'm going to be raised from the dead. And then I'm coming back to teach you and other people how to be disciples. They did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to ask him. Why? I'm going to put you on the spot. Why were they afraid to ask him?
Well, first of all, I think it's a human nature. I don't want to ask a dumb question. Secondly...
Now, you were talking about you or in general?
In general.
Okay, in general, that's true.
We don't want to ask a dumb question. Secondly, Jesus is the rabbi, which means big teacher, the teacher, the master of teachers.
Capital R.
Yeah, he is the teacher. They don't understand, and they're not grasping it. And I think the other reason is they're just thinking a lot of times, like a lot of humans, we think, well, I'll figure it out later. It'll come to me. I'll wait.
Yeah.
And
there are also teachers that have given all of us the advice, just look at it a little bit more. Don't, like you just said, don't throw it away. Just look at it.
It'll happen.
It'll crystallize in your mind. It will help with other scriptures, with other people, with other professors that you had that may help you gain an insight in this one scripture. So don't, like we talked a little while ago, don't just jump over this.
Well, now, what I gave you was what I think is the normal human condition. But I have an opinion of why they didn't understand.
Okay.
It didn't marry up to what they wanted to happen. Because what they wanted to happen was Jesus was going to go into Jerusalem, become king, and rule over them forever.
And maybe they've talked to him about this before. It's a 3-year period here.
But he's telling them, hey, I'm going to die. When you have a preconceived idea of what you believe is going to happen, and somebody else tells you, no, that's not what's going to happen, this is what's going to happen, you can have a misunderstanding, a complete and total misunderstanding. That's why, like, today in our world, we've got all kinds of different individuals proclaiming what's going to happen in the next 6 months of our world that we live in. Year, 2 years. The doom that supposedly is going to happen from all the various things, from the economy to the global warming, to because so-and-so is president, or this so-and-so is president. We've got all this proclaiming of what's going to happen. Does anybody really know?
No, they have no clue.
No clue. But they've already made up their mind what they know is going to happen, and Jesus is telling them that's not what's going to happen.
And in modern times, there are people who read the Bible, radio, TV, and other places.
They proclaim all kinds of...
They know exactly what's going to happen. And here's my chart, and this is what it says, and this is what it says here.
And I can give you the secret, as you pointed out, I can give you the secrets for $10.99.
Yeah. It's P.O. Box 454, no, Box 666.
Yeah.
I love it when guys on TV, and I'm not saying this just because I'm not on TV. I have no...
Well, sort of like you are.
I know. Oh, yeah. Well, there's one of my goals that I've accomplished that I didn't even know about.
You might not be on network TV,
I always wanted to be with somebody intelligent, so we're still working on this. But, well, I don't even remember what, I'm so intelligent, I don't remember what we were talking about.
Oh, the people who put the things out there on TV about...
Oh, yeah, they have their own charts, and then next week or the week after that, maybe that chart's outdated, so they make a new chart, or they write another book that's just different than the one they wrote 30 years ago.
Well,
everybody has a secret, and everybody thinks they know what's going to happen. We don't.
No.
We don't have a clue.
No, we have no clue. And to pretend like we do is, first of all, crazy. But probably there's an attribute that God said He loves about His children, His faithful followers, some of them are in Hebrews chapter 11, the book of faith. It actually makes one statement in there, and even though none of them got what they were looking for, they remained faithful even in spite of it. Now I'm paraphrasing, of course. Abraham was sent off into a distant land, having no clue who he was going to run into or see, but because God told him to do it, he did it.
He moved to a place where he didn't know anybody.
No one. And you've got David standing up in front of a giant. You've got Mary, the mother of Jesus, being told she's going to be pregnant, and has not been with any man.
She's pretty sure she recalls not being with anybody.
Yeah. So there are elements, there are times in our life when you're called to believe that something is good comes from going through the understandings of what Jesus is trying to tell us in our lives. Mm-hmm. That's not always easy to do. We've kind of gotten, as Americans, there's a popular thing that's come about in the last 100 years is guarantee, warranty. We want that guarantee that if I do this, it's going to be good. I don't want to do it if it's not going to work out for me.
You mean like a job?
Yeah, or whatever it may be.
Or a marriage.
Yeah. Or have a child.
Or having a kid. Or choosing where you
never to go sick.
Yeah.
Never to have financial problems. For life to always be perfect. I've never seen a rough wave. I just always got smooth sailing in everything in my life.
Yeah, well, I don't know where you live, but I'm going to buy a house in your neighborhood.
Well, I don't have that.
Oh, okay.
Remember, I just had to pull about a dozen tree stumps out of my yard because of where the high water got up. So, yeah. No, their storms come. Trees blow down.
The Griffithsville Fire Department didn't come and do that for you?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, where are we going to go next, Mark?
Well, that'll have to happen next week, Steve.
That'll have to happen. They did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to ask him. There's their response. They didn't understand, and they maybe had talked about bits and pieces of this before, and they didn't want to say, we weren't listening very well last time. So,
and you brought up a good point last. You brought up a good point last week.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me write this down.
Okay. When you made the comment that just because you don't understand doesn't mean you've got something wrong. Mm-hmm. It's just there's going to be a lot of times in our lives where we don't understand. We don't know the outcome, and that is the moment, as I was mentioning earlier, we're just going to have to trust God and be okay with that.
If you go through the Bible and act like you know everything and you figured out everything, you're not a very good Bible student. The Bible student...
You're the last person I want to hear explain something.
No kidding.
Yeah. Well, next week, I was lucky. I got the piece of paper. We're going to take a look at some responses, and the question is going to be, which one is the one we should have? And Steve has got some really good verses.
Well, I don't know who came up with that, but that sounds brilliant.
Well, that's what we got coming, and Steve wrote it down, and he just didn't remember it. What, have you got anything you want to add before we shut this one up?
Yeah, I want to remind our viewing audience, all 6 of them, I want to remind them that this was on the radio last night. There was a Mexican that escaped from the South Central Jail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's the one that got away.
Oh, okay. Somebody's looking for one. We're so glad you tuned in, and so glad that you've allowed us to try to pass on some knowledge. I know we might have got some of that through, but we just pray that we continue to have this time together with you. And on behalf of Steve and I, we say have a great day and see you next week.